So, hello,
Okay.
everybody. I am here with Tim Doherty, and we're here to talk to you about streaming at scale. Tim, thanks for joining me.
You bet, Justin.
I
Excited
have.
to be here.
I'm glad you are, and I have to say, I think we've picked some good backgrounds here. Everyone, we're still in a pandemic. We still have to do these things on Zoom, and so I am sorry if I don't have a green screen behind me this time, and the pieces of my ear are slowly disappearing depending on how I turn. But that's our life
It'll get
today, right?
better. It'll get better as everything gets better. I am actually standing in front of what was a real display at a trade show. I think this is IBC in Amsterdam about coming up on 2 years ago. So at least it's a picture of something real,
Yeah,
even though it's not real.
yeah.
Although I love the ominous Wowza logo in that
You
very
like, yeah,
avant-garde
that
office.
in the
Yeah.
fake building.
Is it fake?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
those are
you're like in the
totally.
future.
Those
That
are
looks like
drawn
this.
buildings. No, I feel like I am in an underground bunker from Resident Evil.
Oh,
Where
wow.
everyone has to
Okay.
work underground, locked up, while they work on the virus to turn everybody into zombies. That's where I am, man. It's a sad place I live in. But hey, so let's talk about live streaming because that's what we're here for.
Sure.
Now, specifically, what I'd like to talk about first is why it's important to to work to have a option to stream at scale. And I guess what I mean by this is, normally speaking, when people buy our product, Wowza Streaming Engine, it's a system that they might house either on premises or in the cloud. But at the end of the day, the bottleneck is its bandwidth. And the reason that that's more important with something like live video streaming versus, let's say, a 5 megabyte file, a PDF file that somebody wants to download, is that there can be situations where you're live streaming something that may go on for a couple hours, and you're getting 200,000 viewers all over the world. And in a situation like that, there's no way one server is going to be able to handle all that bandwidth. Is that true?
No, 100% true. Yeah, and it's interesting how there's a mentality around streaming, even to a small scale. It's generally produced in a way that assumes a very large audience. So it's very easy for content to be viral, if you will. So, you have to think about it in terms of who my audience is and how big it is. If you are just doing a traffic camera in a relatively small community and you have a good idea that there's only going to be no more than 50 people watching it at any given time concurrently, you can get away with a single instance of, say, Wowza Streaming Engine running in a private data center, not even in a cloud, because that's manageable. But when you deal with unmanageable situations, like, and we'll probably cover it, other types of events, soccer games, very large scale concerts, perhaps political events, things that can really
Even
require.
yeah, like even corporate training, for example.
Oh, yeah, and corporate streaming has been a tremendous scaling opportunity for cloud services. Given that we are in a pandemic, as we mentioned earlier, there is a significant requirement on networks to be able to reach large private audiences that are scattered all over the globe. So it's definitely a very critical topic for anybody who's considering building their own streaming this streaming build out.
Yeah, let's talk about some scenarios and what somebody can do. As I was saying before, in just example of a 5 megabyte file, if somebody was trying to, let's say we sent out an announcement, oh, we have an update, right? So that update is 150 megabytes, and we send it out to 20,000 users. Even if, let's say, 15 or 20 were downloading it at the same time that day, that's still manageable. But what we're talking about for live streaming could be, let's say, 30,000 people at once. So here's my example with 30,000 people at once, where that's not manageable. Let's say we're dealing with a corporation that has 32 satellite offices, and it's doing a company-wide announcement that's a live stream. Now, sure, we could be talking about 32 offices, but those people could be viewing it in multiple conference rooms or at home on their computer, and they have, let's say, over 100,000 people worldwide that are watching this at the end of the day. So that's not necessarily 100,000 screens, but let's say that's even 30,000 screens. So that goes back to our 30,000 example. Um, what's the solution that we have to scale that way? And we're talking about it right now in a private situation where we don't want this necessarily available to anybody outside of a private network. So the people at home, let's say, could be using a VPN, and I think that's often the case. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what comes to mind as you're describing that is the challenge of a corporate streaming workflow where you have multiple locations, typically globally situated, and inside each one of those locations you have hundreds of people watching the stream. At the same time, you have people all over the globe that are working from remote locations, probably their home office, where they're in a typical scenario, network-wise, they're signed into a VPN and they have access to network resources at the home office or on the home data center. So that's good for security because they're exchanging files, information isn't necessarily being exposed to the internet because it's encrypted by a VPN. The inversion of that is when you have to access a local streaming server. So we're talking again about media servers that are in the brick and mortar building. You have to access that by VPN. And if you have thousands of people trying to access through an internet connection, because that's what supports the VPN, you're probably going to deal with a high utilization or maybe even an overwhelming network situation for your internet connection.
Right, because that one building is just not going to have enough bandwidth to handle all those people trying to connect to it.
In some cases they do. Some corporations have such a profile that they're invested into, like the Denver International Airport. I believe they have 2 10 gigabyte pipes going into that facility to support their free Wi-Fi. And one is primary and one is secondary. And so that's an incredible amount of bandwidth, 10 gigabytes, essentially 20. So, generally speaking, the Wi-Fi is really good there, but they've invested in that, in that internet infrastructure.
Right. And our office uses Comcast. So it's a standard, I think, business Comcast option, right? But we're probably way more limited in terms of how many people can connect in to use our VPN.
Yeah, particularly on the upload. Comcast Business DSL, typically today, it's 2021, is about 120 megs down and about 25 up. And so that upload is your constraint. So let's get back to our conversation. You have a bunch of people in conference rooms or at their desk. They're all watching the local media server. So they're just hitting the switch gear. They're not going out to the internet. And they're having a great experience because it's a local, super stable connection, streaming connection. But these people that are off-prem, what we've done within the range of 2020, when a lot of companies were coming to us, a lot of our customers who have significant investment in media servers on-prem. So they're, again, running in their brick and mortar building. They're like, help. We've got all these people off in their homes and in remote locations, and it's starting to really hurt our internet connection. Our CEO is angry because he can't talk to everybody at once. We've actually partnered with some companies and helped engineer what's called a split tunnel VPN. And granted, the network expertise is to set this up is typically on the vendor of the VPN. But basically what a split tunnel does is I'm on my VPN at home and I want to watch this all hands meeting. So it's smart enough to say, if I am presented with a domain that goes to, say, Wowza CDN, it's cdn3.wowza.com, I believe, or something like that. The VPN goes, oh, cdn3.wowza.com. I'm not going to go down the VPN to hit that media server. I'm going to just jump on out to the internet and use the local, whoever, AT&T, CenturyLink, Comcast connection, their normal internet connection at their house, and I'm going to connect to the Wowza CDN. And by the way, we have security on there, like token authentication and things to maintain, the integrity of authentication. And they can literally scale on a CDN. So that's a challenging thing to set up. It's something that we typically would deploy professional services to deploy and test, but it is possible to scale. Using your existing on-prem infrastructure, so you take care of all your local people. If there are people in the offices, especially during a pandemic, it's hit and miss. But we can definitely scale using a content delivery network. And I don't know if we got into what a CDN does or if we need to. And forgive me going short story long on this, but that's generally how you approach it.
No, no, no. I mean, if you want to talk about CDNs, I think most people understand these days that in order to deliver content, having a network out there that's already designed to
Hmm.
deliver that content, to cache that content locally, so people can access it faster. A CDN is great for that,
Oh, a
and
CDN is
certainly,
fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
I'm. Go ahead.
I was about to say, well, we have our own Wowza CDN, which is using, I think at this point, Fastly. Is that correct?
That's correct. Wowza uses both Fastly, and that's our primary CDN, but we also have had a relationship with Akamai for several years. And the CDN is they've been in place for a long time
Right.
to
And we don't have
offload.
to just talk about it in terms of this example. I mean, certainly you could be
Mhm.
using that CDN for something more openly distributed, like let's
Totally.
say streaming a soccer game.
Mhm.
If that's being watched through, let's say, by a broadcast company, and they're streaming it not just to their website as a live stream, but also to their app, right?
Right.
So we're talking, again, maybe not just 30,000, hundreds of thousands of people across the
Mhm.
world watching it at the same time. The CDN is still a great solution for this.
Well, yeah, there's a CDN, and then there's the media server layer, which processes the stream, and that's why Wowza and a CDN are two complementing technologies. So I just want to stream a soccer game that I know I'm going to have 50,000 people watch. I have to use a CDN for that, unless I want to invest in all the infrastructure and strategy and auto scaling and all that to build my own, which is kind of silly, unless you're a major broadcasting corporation. So I can send a video, which is, it's good to break down what you're actually sending, because a CDN was designed to help websites scale. So you're not just serving a website from an ISP, or some server on your desk running Apache. You're actually having a content delivery network that knows how to cache text, HTML, images, and then they added video. Well, it's not like a video stream is going through a CDN. They're chunks of data. So Wowza provides little, typically 10-second chunks that a CDN can grab using HTML and cache. So the CDN can actually hold thousands of little tiny chunks of video, and then a playlist basically tells the player which chunks to play at which time. I'm really simplifying it, but it's important to recognize that a CDN is an HTTP accelerator. It caches content that it gets from somewhere else, and that somewhere else is a Wowza environment. We're really working hard on our Wowza Streaming Cloud product, which is effectively that somewhere else that we manage, we stand up, we optimize, we build things on, and it does things like transcoding.
Right.
You can connect an encoder to it and create adaptive bit rate. It records. You can apply captions. You can do manipulation of audio tracks. There's a lot of very important functions that Wowza Streaming Engine and Wowza Streaming Cloud Transcoding provide that totally optimizes things for a CDN. So if I want to scale real simply, I can take my encoder, Wowza Clearcaster, Teradek, Teradek Cube, Epiphan Pearl, whatever. I can take that, send it to Wowza Streaming Cloud. Wowza Streaming Cloud transcodes it. Let's just say it's just transcoding. So it takes 1080, makes a 720, 360, 160. It creates this adaptive bitrate ladder, and then the CDN just grabs it and serves it globally. It's that simple. So that's where I like to emphasize, when you're scaling with Wowza, we've got the transcoding, we've got the ingest for it, but then the CDN automatically scales globally. And that's, I hate to use the word magic, but that's where the magic happens with regard to scaling.
So I'm sorry. If we could just take a step back. One
Sure.
part I'm confused there. We sort of moved over from talking about Wowza CDN, which
Mhm.
honestly I'm excited about some of the things that are happening
Mhm.
with us right now, connecting with Fastly, since more analytics options are soon going to be possible with all of that, and that's the one nice thing about connecting with a specific company, being able to work together and do
Oh,
something.
yeah.
But you kind of moved over and talked about it in relation to Wowza Streaming Cloud. Now certainly you have options of connecting Wowza Streaming Engine to Wowza CDN, and then there's Wowza Streaming Cloud that already has a CDN built in with it. So are you talking about just using Wowza Streaming Cloud, or are you talking about options where somebody might have an on-prem option with Wowza Streaming Engine and then be connecting it not to Wowza CDN, but to Wowza Streaming Cloud?
Well, let's draw a line. There's two functions of Wowza Streaming Cloud. There's the transcoding, and then there's the actual content delivery network. The content delivery network is a special implementation of Fastly CDN and even uses Akamai to do all of that global scaling that we talked about. And yes, Fastly has some incredible, very fast metrics that you can grab. So there's some great API functions in Fastly. So there's the CDN part and the transcoding part. Now, the transcoder, if you will, by default is available in Wowza Streaming Cloud. When you first log in, you see, several wizards, if you will, that help you connect your encoder. That's setting up your transcoder, which is a managed service that cloud provides. Now, this is the delineation. You can use that transcoder function, which is managed with Wowza CDN, which is Fastly. So you've got the turnkey option, or you can not use the Wowza transcoder, not take advantage of our managed service capability, and you're not having to worry about licensing and all that. And you can use Wowza Streaming Engine on-prem that is a origin to the CDN. So when we're getting back to that brick and mortar enterprise big evil corporation.com streaming workflow, you can actually continue to use your on-prem server, your media server on-prem, as an origin to Wowza CDN. So you don't have to duplicate your work. You're probably already transcoding in your own data center if you're a corporation. You've already got all that infrastructure set up. You've got Wirecast, you've got Clearcast, you've got encoders that are already set to an IP address, and everything just works great. But what we're doing is bolting on the CDN as an extension of your on-prem workflow. So your server or servers on-prem are still transcoding. They're still recording. They're still doing all that they've always done. But the CDN knows where it is because you set it up, and users can access through the CDN as well.
Okay.
I hope that helps describe it a little bit better. But I am championing the Wowza Streaming Cloud product for obvious reasons. But it does make it much, much easier if you don't want to get into server management. If you just want to be able to do what you do, produce a program and stream it out to the world. It's a great solution.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. One thing I would like to talk about, we have been talking about scaling in terms of a content delivery network for quite a bit here. And I absolutely agree. Like this is, in modern times, the easiest way to go is to use a content delivery network that's out there, and one that's already well integrated with systems that you're using makes the most sense to use, because in the future, and even now, you're able to access functionality that wouldn't normally be available if you just went and picked your own CDN out there. But what I do want to ask about is other options for scaling. We talked about CDNs for scaling. So there are instances where corporations want to have everything in-house. Maybe they have already either on premises, on their satellite locations. They want to create their own virtual private network to do scaling, or perhaps they're creating their own like AWS instances in the cloud for scaling. How does that work with Wowza Streaming Engine?
Fantastic question. And part of the driving reason behind that is strategy and security in many respects. The strategy is I want to keep everything under my control. I don't trust CDNs. I don't trust anybody. My business is way too secure. So you may want to completely manage every aspect of your streaming operation. That's where building your own or scaling it on your own using our software is very advantageous. The other part of that is when a lot of companies already have a very deep relationship with maybe Azure or Google or Amazon Web Services. So they have a lot of flexibility when it comes to deploying server resources in EC2, for example. So they would prefer to stand up servers in geographic locations and use a load balancer and build that themselves. So, how does it work? Effectively, you use, and I think you and I did a video on this recently to describe how to do it, but you use the Wowza Origin Edge repeater, or you set up a push workflow where you're using SRT and some other protocols for video to go from server A to server B, or from origin to edge. So basically what you do is you figure out how many people are going to be watching this content and from where, and you make an estimation. So for example, let's say I need 1,000 people in Boston. I'd probably have 3 servers there as my primary and 3 servers as my backup, and they'd be load balanced. So anyone who hails from Boston, whether they're in a corporate facility or you have some way of recognizing their location, you send them through the load balancer, and Wowza provides that load balancer free with our software to that group of servers, and they're watching directly. So the workflow at a base level is the Wowza Origin Edge repeater. You have an origin server that does the transcoding in most cases. So it's creating your adaptive bitrate ladder. It's got a lot of GPU or CPU resources. It's really busy. And the edge server just sits there in an idle state. So that server in Boston is just sitting there waiting for someone to connect. As soon as a client connects, so somebody connects from Chrome or Firefox or their phone, it wakes up that server and it immediately goes to the origin server and grabs the stream or streams that are being requested. And so you can control bandwidth consumption between servers using an origin edge repeater. And there's some other advantages to using SRT, which is a kind of an error resilient protocol. And I don't know if we want to get too far into protocols, but basically, Justin, it's a matter of estimating, scaling your own resources globally. And you can get into auto scaling, and there's some expertise that we can provide with that. But fundamentally, you scale via network based on demand.
Right. So as you were saying, great for private networks, great for people who want to keep things, let's say, well, government, for example, is probably a great example of that, or security. Those are, but also, let's say, healthcare, right?
Yeah.
I mean, with HIPAA, I'm sure they want to keep it as secure as possible, and they want to consider something like this as opposed to even I'm assuming through telehealth, where you are consulting or doing consultations with patients, right? You'd want to keep a secure way of streaming.
It's not necessarily scaling in the event large scale.
You're right. That's a one-to-one. That's not a good example.
There is scaling. No. It is a good example in the sense that you have to think about, if you're doing a lot of one-to-one connections, how many ones are there going to be? Are you going to have 1,000 doctors all talking to a patient at the same time? Because that sounds a lot like 2,000 connections. So there's always a scaling element to it.
Right.
But I think in the context of what we're talking about is that one to many or one to thousands. And you're 100% correct. Governments, high security financial organizations, healthcare organizations, they really like to own their own infrastructure. But at the same time, there has been a breaking point with the criticality of having so many people working remote. So using a CDN is practical, but you've got to bolt on the fairly advanced security apparatus. Apparatus isn't necessarily a technical term, but I think it describes it. There's a lot of installing a DRM solution, which we provide in Wowza Streaming Cloud now, or perhaps you need to do a token authentication where your website literally needs to talk to Wowza and make sure that one player is the only player authorized to play that URL. So those things are kind of challenging to set up, but when you have it set up, a high security company can use a CDN confidently.
Great. Well, hey, Tim, thank you for talking to me about all of this. I know it's a lot of information out there, and at the end of the day, I think I absolutely hear you. A content delivery network is a great solution. It's the easiest solution, but certainly having the option to build your own. And that being said, there are many CDNs that actually use us in that whole process to do exactly what we're talking about in terms of building their own. But
yeah, for sure. I think it's important to recognize that Wowza is a very, very solid platform when it comes to sourcing into a CDN. A CDN is not really that streaming expert. They're not streaming experts. They're experts at caching and global distribution. And we come in with the expertise on streaming and security, and we really drive it home. So I think anybody, if you're scaling for a webcam with 5 users at a time, or if you're scaling for 500,000 people, our expertise in tuning and optimizing video going into a CDN using our software or our services is a very, very strong move when someone's moving towards building their own streaming infrastructure. So that was kind of a salesy way to wrap this
No
up.
problem.
I
In
think
fact,
you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, well, also for anybody who wants, we also have a PDF file that is a report on streaming with Wowza. Please do check it out. I'll put it in the description. Other than that, everyone, happy streaming.